This weekend we are commemorating the 207th anniversary of the American victory in the Battle of New Orleans. That victory, that battle, which happened January 8th, 1815, was the culmination of a several-month-long advance and about a 4-week campaign in an attempt to capture New Orleans. Great Britain, since the mid-18th century, had cast its eyes on New Orleans, recognizing that whoever held New Orleans controlled the mouth of the Mississippi River, and whoever controlled the mouth of the river controlled the entirety of the Mississippi Valley. So, finally, in 1814, the British landed in what would become St. Bernard Parish, December 23rd, and then there were several skirmishes. The December 23rd skirmish, the very day that they arrived, Jackson was warned by people that the British had made landfall at the plantation of Jacques-Philippe Villeroy. And that very night, Jackson mounted an assault on the British, which so stunned them that it kept them from marching instantly on New Orleans. And there are many historians who feel that one engagement saved the city. It gave Jackson time to build his rampart at the Chalmette plantation. And then, of course, the American victory in the Battle of New Orleans forever resolved the question of who owned the Mississippi Valley. From that time forward, there was no question that the Mississippi Valley was owned by the United States. And of course, the question of that ownership and American ownership of the valley enabled or made possible the westward expansion of the United States to the Pacific Ocean. And of course, coming out of that was the development of the United States as an economic titan and a global power. So we like to say here in St. Bernard that the destiny of the United States was determined in this battle.
Bonjour, mon ami, allez-vous? I represent a sergeant in the Battalion of Orleans Volunteers. It's important because these guys were just ordinary New Orleanians. They're shopkeepers and bartenders and bricklayers and cabinet makers and musicians. They signed up to be in militia. They signed up to clear the trees after the hurricane comes. They signed up to fix the levee after the river overflows. They did not sign up for 10,000 British troops to come running across an open field. But yet they stood and did their duty for 3 months out at Chalmette Battlefield. There are all kinds of stories that come out of this battle, this campaign, that we never think of in modern times today. The St. Charles streetcar line comes from guys in this unit. Second line parades partially come from guys in this unit. We do think the Pontchartrain Expressway is laid out in the way it is because of guys in this unit. These things all affect us, and we just pass them by. We don't worry about it. We don't think about it. It's important that these stories get told.
Color party, advance the colors! Color detail, present arms!
We're the British unit that's fighting at the Battle of New Orleans. We're a collection of the 93rd Regiment and the 95th Regiment, who are the Green Jackets, the rifles. We just raised our morning colors, and we're here to engage the American forces, see if we can take New Orleans. The greatest army before the British Army was the French Army, and they wreaked havoc through Europe. But when the Duke of Wellington took over the army, then the tables turned, and the British Army became the strongest force in the world. So when we came to the Americas and figured it would be a walk in the park, we were very wrong. It's a very important history about the United States, and it's an undercovered section of our history. Everybody thinks it's Revolutionary War Part 2, which isn't quite correct. I'd like people to remember that their ancestors fought and died. Some fought and lived, and continued to increase the wealth of our nation in all aspects.
We represent the British Royal Artillery, And our squad is composed of a cannon crew, which takes 6 men to properly fire the cannon. The cannon we're using out here now is a 4-pound British cannon. It's on a butterfly carriage, and they call it the butterfly, obviously, because of the boxes that are on both sides of it. And the cannon was used by the British, but it was also in battle sometimes captured by the opposing force, and they would use it. So you'd see that British style on both sides of the line sometimes. But in our situation down here today, there were cannon during the Battle of New Orleans, and there weren't a lot, but they had several 3-pounders. And there's been some discussion about that, but history says it did. Now, whether they unloaded them and actually employed them in the battle down here, we're not sure of. What we had 3 different types of charges on it. One was a round ball with a 1-pound charge attached to it with copper, with a sabot, and a pound of powder in a linen sack on the bottom. Then we had a grape charge once they got in closer that we would use. The first charge was effective out to 1 mile. And wherever the ranks formed up, our goal was to bust up the ranks. And we do that by skipping that 3-pound cannonball across the field, take out several guys in the ranks. Then we'd switch about 100 yards or less to grape shot. And when we had grape shot, we would employ that at about 100 yards down to about 50. Once they got closer than that, we'd go to canister, which was a little tin can on top of that charge, and it would have about 30 musket balls in it, and we'd employ that at about 50 yards or less. And it was all of it designed to bust up the rank, to reduce their firepower, and to make them lose interest in the battle. It's important to understand where we came from, how our country was formed, and the reasons for it. The War of 1812 was the first time we became, the world as a whole recognized us as a sovereign nation. Up until then, they still looked on us as a British colony. The War of 1812 changed all of that. So that's important to us, to understand how history affects us today.
We're representing the Tennessee Militia, who would have volunteered for Andrew Jackson, first during the war against the Creeks, and then later on here at Battle of New Orleans. Variety of roles, of course, they're citizen soldiers. They were involved in some of the fighting on the West Bank. A lot of them were held in reserves, but they came in from all over Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi territories. Quite valuable. Obviously, Jackson's outnumbered. He needs the men, and these guys answered the call. I believe that this history is part of our identity as a nation. Certainly, this battle was pivotal in maintaining the United States border integrity after the War of 1812.
First off, did you know that it was the United States who declared war against Great Britain? Did y'all know that? The United States declared war against Great Britain. They didn't declare war against us until much later. Now, you have to think, United States is only, 25 years old? They've got no army, they've got no money, and they're going to declare war against the greatest fighting force on the face of the planet, the British military. Why in the world would they do that? Doesn't make sense, does it? Okay, well, they had a real good reason. Great Britain was at war with France and had been for over 10 years. And Great Britain was passing a lot of trade laws that ended up hurting the United States trade. So that made the United States angry, but Great Britain was protecting its own interests. British sailors got really tired of fighting in France, and they started deserting like crazy from the British Navy. So Great Britain took care of this by using a program called impressment, where they forced people to serve in the Royal Navy. Well, they started stopping American ships. And if a sailor had a British accent, they'd grab them off that ship and say, "You're a runaway, you're coming, welcome back to the Royal Navy." The whole problem was they kidnapped about 6,000 Americans in that process. And that got America really mad too. But they said they were just getting their men back.
Mi nombre es Wakachobi Tustanuki. Y'all remember me talking about that? Okay, now, if you see any more Indians today, the first word I said was Eshle. That means hello or how are you doing? And then I said my name is Wakachobi Tustanuki. Can anybody remember what that is in English?
Yeah.
What? My name is Blue Heron. In Creek, it's Wakachobi Tustanoogie. I'm a Creek leader that came over from Florida to witness the battle. The British were trying to get the Creeks, and the Creeks lived over in South Alabama and the Panhandle of Florida, and they were trying to get us to help them out against the Americans. So some of the chiefs came over here to watch the British beat up on the Americans, and of course that didn't happen like it was supposed to. But there's actually two Indian factions here. On the American side, the Americans had the Choctaws. They were from Mississippi helping out in the battle. And there were, like I said, there were a few Indians that were Creeks. And we came from the Panhandle of Florida and South Alabama. And we were more than anything else, we were watching the battle to see the British beat up on the Americans, which didn't happen, of course. This is a Creek hunting camp. And if you were walking around the woods here in the late early 1800s, you could come up on a camp that looked just like this one. And what we would actually be doing was deer hunting. Now, when we were called on to come help the British out, we still would be using a camp. Now, this is not what we lived in. We actually lived in log cabins, but this is a hunting camp, and it's called a lean-to. And some people, some of the soldiers called them shebangs, but this is what we'd be living in while the battle was over here taking place. It's really important, I think, today for you young people to learn more about the Native Americans. Now, we don't use the term Native Americans that much. What we talk about is either our name, which is Creeks, or Southeastern Indians. And of course, the thing about is this is when the Europeans came over, and I could really talk for an hour or two on this. They learned a lot from the from the Native Americans, and as far as living, planting, fishing, hunting, things like that. So there's just tons and tons of things that we could talk to you about if we had more time today.
We have had an ancestor who fought in this battle with us.
They might have stood right here.
Right here. Show us where we were standing, Mrs. Slaughter.
This is where we are right now. This is the American line. And this right here is where the Walmart is behind here. So this is the American line. And what is this river? Mississippi. And who are these people in red? British. The British at that time were the world's superpower. They had the best navy, the best army. They were unstoppable. They had just put down Napoleon, and they were coming around here to capture New Orleans. I live in New Orleans, and my ancestors fought in the Battle of New Orleans. Well, the significance of that is I always find it really exciting to go someplace and know my DNA has been here. It really makes a big connection to me standing where my ancestors stood. One thing about the Battle of New Orleans and this land is there are so many people that are still in New Orleans, and more than likely, a lot of them have ancestors that fought on in this battle. My husband has ancestors that fought in this battle too. I mean, who knew, 200 years later that we would have met and gotten married, and we have all these ancestors. So, but it's unique because, say Shiloh, those ancestors are scattered, but here they're still concentrated, and there's still a lot of people here that are related to the men that fought in this battle.
How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel real connected to history, and it makes me feel very proud.
One more, what you got, buddy?
What I'm doing today is doing a 19th century cooking demonstration. And we specifically call it a demonstration because the women's role at the Battle of New Orleans would have been limited to that of a hired laundress. The U.S. Army allowed women to be hired as laundresses. They did not actually do the cooking. That would be the role of one of the men in a squad of about 16 people. They would cook for the squad. But we're doing the demonstration here today, cooking over an open fire, giving the students and visitors here a sample of what they would cook. It was easy food. It was stuff that could be left unattended and sitting there for long periods of time while they were taking care of their official business. So, we're going back. We're cooking today vegetable soup, vegetables that could have been procured locally. with beef in it, which if you were lucky or took out of your rations. And then later on we'll be doing chicken and dumplings, which is like a chicken with bread and biscuits in it, which also was a common recipe during that time because it can cook over a long period of time over the fire. Just because women were not officially part of the Battle of New Orleans didn't mean they didn't play a role. The women did vital things that supported the troops and the community, including, like, we know the history of the Ursuline nuns would daily send rations and food and full meals out to the battlefield along with medical supplies and nursing things. So any of the soldiers who were ill or severely wounded would have been taken back into the city, British or American. In fact, after the battle, thousands of British soldiers were tended in the city of New Orleans until they were well enough to go home. My message is it's important for us to learn our history, especially in a community like this that played such an important role, and know that we're part of the history of our country. Our small part here is part of our bigger history. This was an important battle, an important turning point for our country, and its turning point and fate was decided right here in our community.
My name's Annalise Cassar Tedesco, and behind me you're seeing some of my and my sister's students. Her name's Ariana Cassar Cruz. We are the music theater program at Chalmette High School, and our students are performing traditional dances that would be performed during the 1800s, right around the time when the Battle of New Orleans was happening. You know, my sister and I grew up in St. Bernard, and we would come to battle reenactments when we were really young, and we fell in love with the dancing. As we grew, we actually took classes and did some, community opportunities to learn how to do this from great adults who have already done so much of that research, and we're just part of that legacy of carrying on the tradition. So this dance that you see them doing right here behind me is called the Grand March, and this would be performed traditionally at the opening of every ball or dance party. And the plan here was that you would get to see everybody that had showed up at this party. So you're dancing with one person, but you're really saying hello to the whole room.
I learned about the struggles that the people in the Battle of New Orleans had to go through, and all of the things that they used and the things they had to remind them of home. And it's important to learn these things because we need to understand how they felt, to learn about empathy and sympathy for others, to learn more emotions towards others because you don't know what they're going through. People during the war had a lot of issues, and there was a lot of bad things that happened to them which caused issues in their mental health.
We learned about how the soldiers lived and their lifestyle of how they live during the war.
Why is it important that you learn this?
It's important so we know not to repeat history, so all of this doesn't happen again.
I learned about all the how their lives were back during that time and how harsh they were.
What does it make you think when all this important battle happened right here in Chalmette?
It's cool to be where a war happened, or a battle.
I learned that many people who fought in the war, they had scarce and hard livings or styles of living, and also how they fought hard for our country, and they're living hard, and their clothes are very scarce and poor, and they were just not living the best, and also they really fought for the plan.
What's the significance of the Battle of New Orleans?
It's significant because it showed the country that Louisiana, or it could fight for the country. It was powerful and it could stand up for themselves.
I learned that we had many differences between our soldiers, and we had different ways of life, different backgrounds, different ethnicities. But in spite of all that, we all came together as one to fight for our respect as a nation.
What's the significance of the Battle of New Orleans?
It kind of showed everyone we're strong, we're independent, we don't need anyone else, and we're our own country, and we don't need them to do anything. We're ourselves, we're America.
I learned how they make a bunch of different foods that were back then. They showed us how to make butter and stuff. It was really cool. And that there was a lot of different stuff that they ate that probably wouldn't be considered to be digestible now.
Why is the Battle of New Orleans so important?
It was the key victory of the War of 1812. If it wasn't for this, British would have taken the Mississippi River and America could have been gone. This is what made us America.
I learned how some soldiers had to sleep outside, and if they didn't wear certain clothes, they could freeze to death. And like they had thick pants and wool socks that were actually water repellent, which was pretty cool.
What's the significance of the Battle of New Orleans?
It showed that America could stand up against other people. It showed that we could be an independent nation, and it did prove that Louisianans could be loyal to America.
I learned how things really were back then. Like we learned about how they made butter, and we even got to taste test it. We got to learn about what kind of clothes they made and how they even bandaged wounds and stuff.
Why was the Battle of New Orleans important?
I mean, it really made Louisiana what it is. You know, before the battle, we were like a fresh new state, and yeah, it made us who we are.
I learned that the geographical features of the Battle of New Orleans and the things that they had to overcome so they could fight.
Why is the Battle of New Orleans so important?
It's important because we proved that we were loyal to the United States of America, and if we didn't fight in the Battle of New Orleans, we would have lost the Mississippi River, which is a major port.
Actually, today I've learned an abundance of things, such as advantages. If you were looking, you could see that the American people were like stepping up because they knew the land better. I also have learned that the circumstance they were in. I could see the clothing they would have to wear. It was very thin and very poor.
What's the significance of the Battle of New Orleans?
Actually, without the Battle of New Orleans, we wouldn't have like a lot of stuff that we have in New Orleans today. Like we wouldn't have the Mississippi River, which is like an important part of everything in America.
I learned like the lifestyles that these people lived in and how they lived and the struggles that they went through.
Why is it important to learn this history?
To see like the struggles they went through to get where we are now, and what like happened and how we are like where we are now in life.
It's just so important for young people and for everyone to learn this history, because if they don't know their history, they don't know who they are. They don't have an identity. And this battle most definitely had a great impact on defining the identity of the United States.
Our message to the children is that New Orleans was an important part of the War of 1812, and winning this battle pretty much secured the future of the United States.
We know from other events like this nationally that not only can we educate people about the significance culturally and historically of this battle, but that also as it grows, it can have a tremendous economic impact that's very positive on the community. So we're trying to get this going in a good forward way, trying to move things ahead, and we think that great things will come of this as a result in the future.